Nobody believed she could carry an unconscious man out of a burning helicopter cockpit. Nobody thought she, with her small frame and soft voice, would be the only one daring to rush in while everyone else stood watching. They called her the safety doll. Until that windy afternoon when the Black Hawk crashed nose first into the sand, and time was measured in seconds. And right then she was the only one who stepped forward. Under the high New Mexico sky, the wind slithered past the metal roofs of Kirtland Air Force Base as if it never meant to stop. Fine dust swirled in gusts, sticking to collars and creeping into the worn heels of boots. In that open sky, where helicopters sat silent like broken-winged birds waiting to be revived, that girl walked quietly, not rushed, not slow, steady, like the breath of someone used to being doubted. Her name was Dana Mitchell, 30 years old, airman, aviation rescue, United States Air Force. To some, she was just a name. To others, that name conjured a fragile soldier incapable of big things. A girl too small among the tall, broad-shouldered men with voices like clanging steel. Dana had a compact build, not frail, but disciplined. Everything about her had a purpose, hair tied back tight to stay clear in a rescue cockpit. Boots unpolished because mud would hide the shine. Watch worn upside down on her wrist so she could check the time while pulling a stretcher without twisting her arm. She didn't talk much, only when necessary. In the search and rescue team at the base, her quietness became the reason they gave her a nickname, the safety doll. They said it was half joking, half mocking, but it echoed behind her on the training field every time. There's the safety doll. Looks pretty standing there. Don't let the wind blow her away. Careful. She'll break a bone trying to carry someone. Dana heard. Of course, she heard. Her ears worked fine. Better than most thought. But she didn't react. No glance, no frown. She just tightened her backpack straps a little more and walked past the row of aircraft straight to the old UH-60 waiting for inspection. While others lingered, joking, she was already inside the cockpit. Her hands carefully checked each hook, counted every anchor rope, tested every cable lock. She touched the rear door latch as if memorizing its place in the dark. When everything's burning, when there was no time to fumble for a handle. No one taught her to inspect so thoroughly, and no manual said, count the clicks of a seatbelt's clasp. But she did it anyway. Silently. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She didn't see herself as a victim, and she just needed to be sure that if the day came, the day a helicopter wasn't standing still, her hands wouldn't shake. On the training field, drills went on as usual. She pulled stretchers, moved dummy victims, and turned her body through simulated routines. Sweat poured from her forehead, dripping past her cap's brim. No one noticed. They only saw her small frame and laughed. A burly soldier, shoulders covered in tattoos, leaned against the side of a helicopter, half smirking, and called out, "Hey, who let her carry that stretcher? Go put some hand lotion on instead." Laughter erupted from the group of three. Dana kept walking. Her hands still gripped the stretcher's handles, never once looking back. When the stretcher was set in place, she adjusted the straps, then slowly sat on the edge of the helicopter floor. Alone. No complaints. No resentment. The night at Kirtland was different from the day. Not because the wind died down, but because human voices fell silent. The sky was inky black, speckled with faint stars. The row of barracks sank into stillness, broken only by the crunch of boots from late-night patrols and the occasional creak of an iron door closing. Dana had just taken off her gloves. The sweat had dried, but the skin on her palms was still red and raw. A blister swelled like a water bubble, its edges peeling. She picked up her water bottle and rinsed her hands briefly, not making a sound. Just a slight wince, then a faint smile, not out of amusement, but from realizing she still wasn't used to it. Despite the training and the preparation, her skin was still softer than steel cables. But that was okay. Next time, it would be tougher. From the women's restroom, a voice drifted out, probably just tagging along for a photo op. Yeah, the safety doll. Heard she was in some of the drill pictures last week. She heard it all. It wasn't new. Those words had no names, no faces attached, but they were enough to brush against the deepest part of someone who'd been dismissed before. Dana stood still, leaning against the edge of her bunk, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. No reaction, no anger. Just something like a small crack starting to shift in her chest. She didn't respond, didn't hold on to the words. She quietly untied her hair, wiped her face, and stepped outside. Tonight, a crescent moon hung low, just bright enough to dimly light the training field. The wind still blew, but not strong enough to turn her back. Dana went to the grassy patch behind the equipment shed. A fixed helicopter mock-up stood there for practicing maneuvers, a place most others didn't bother visiting after official training hours. She went alone. Brought a training stretcher, an expired medical kit, and just herself. Her hands trembled as she lifted the stretcher, not from fear. Her arm muscles were strained and not yet recovered, but her eyes stayed focused. Every movement, every strap notch, every angle of her body. She did it again. Then a third time. Once, her hand slipped off the stretcher's wooden handle, and her knee slammed into the ground. She let out a sharp breath and pushed herself up with her hands. No one was there to help. No one was there to stop her. Then she climbed the rope. The rope was thick and rough, hanging from the mock-up's iron frame. Up she went, then down. Up again. Her raw hands burned, but she didn't stop. Sweat beaded on her forehead, hair stuck to her cheeks. She clenched her teeth, gripping each fiber as if piecing back together the pride those earlier words had stripped away. When she was exhausted, she sat on the ground, her back leaned against the metal frame. She quietly opened the medical kit, one by one. Gloves, artery clamp, spare mask, IV line, knife for cutting ropes. Each item is familiar, but she checked them again as if seeing them for the first time. Then she stood, walked around to the back of the mock-up's tail, where the wind hit hardest. She pulled a small piece of paper from her pocket, an emergency diagram of the tail rotor. Brake points, escape latches, and the position of the sensor to cut power during a flip. She'd asked for that diagram from an old technician last week without much explanation. Just said, "I want to understand." Since then, every night, she brought it out to memorize, not by reading, by imagining. Each latch was a finger's grip, each pivot was a pull. She pictured herself in an upside-down cockpit, smoke everywhere, lights flashing, and only her hands, if they remembered, could open the way for someone trapped inside. The wind whipped across her jacket. She tugged her collar up and tucked the paper into her chest pocket. The air was turning cold, but she wasn't ready to go in. The night was still young. And if they called her doll, then at least she'd be a doll who knew how to open an aircraft door when it mattered. Morning at Kirtland began with the hum of rotors firing up in the aircraft maintenance bay, blending with the sharp whistle of signals from the supply warehouses. Everything was in motion training, inspections, reports, flight schedules, alarms, then training again. But within that steady rhythm, Dana carved out her own. A rhythm only she could hear. She carried out her duties during shifts, Never early, never late. But when others headed to the mess hall, she turned toward the auxiliary training field. When others went to the rec room, she stopped by the technical shed. Physical strength was the first thing she worked on. She didn't start with running. She started with balance. On a suspended stretcher frame, her hands gripped the side handles, body leaning forward, holding steady for 10 seconds, then 20. Then she added backward steps, pivoting turns while holding a weighted stretcher mimicking the pull of a victim from a cramped cockpit. She didn't tell anyone, didn't post about it anywhere. Those extra training sessions were just her, the sand, the ropes, and her heavy breaths. A week later, she began practicing unbuckling a harness with one hand. She wrapped her left hand in cloth, simulating an injury. With her right, she repeated the motion of releasing a 4-point harness's clasp. Sometimes the buckle jammed. She calmly undid it and checked the angle of her pull. Then, I tried again. And again, until the harness snapped free in 1.5 seconds without needing to look. A small thing. But no one else on the team did it, because in standard training, you always had 2 hands, always had time, always had backup. But Dana, she trained for the moment, when there was nothing but herself. One day after her shift, she stopped by the maintenance shed. The small building's fluorescent lights cast a dim glow, reflecting off oil-smeared metal surfaces. She knocked 3 times. An older man, a magnifying loop dangling from his neck, looked up. He was the chief technician, usually reserved for aircraft schematics and a few promising rookies. Mitchell, he squinted. Dana stood at attention. I want to ask about the Black Hawk's side escape hatch. If it flips, how does the opening angle change? The man raised an eyebrow. For a moment, he seemed to doubt what he'd heard. Then, without a word, he pulled open a drawer and took out a stack of yellowed papers. Their edges worn. Old. But this schematic hasn't changed. He set it on the table. Read it. Learn it. You never know. Might need it someday. Dana nodded slightly. Said nothing more. She carefully folded the paper, tucking it into her inner jacket pocket as if it were a map to the only path left when everything else collapsed. That evening, in the barracks, the faint yellow light glinted off the schematics lines. She marked key points with a pencil spots that could be released if the door jammed. Arrows for opening directions, and notes on safe pivot angles under off-axis pressure. She memorized every joint, every spring mechanism, every manual override. Her hands practiced the motions, using a fabric strap tied across a chair to simulate until she could close her eyes and still see it from the perspective of someone trapped. From the position of a rescuer with no light, no time. The next day, she returned to the training field, quietly. But now her steps were heavier, her grip firmer. She didn't smile, didn't look at anyone, but every motion as she pivoted, lifted stretchers, released latches, was no longer just practice. It was preparation for a day that might come. That afternoon, the sky was unusually gray, low clouds hung heavy, and wind from the north churned, kicking up thin dust along training runway 3. The weather report had warned of gusts, but the exercise went on because in real combat, no one waits for calm winds to save lives. The SAR team gathered at the edge of the sandy field and set up to simulate a field triage zone. Black Hawk number 082 was prepped for a simulated damaged equipment landing, a drill where the pilot had to manage without the left side assist system. Dana stood near the back of the line, goggles coated with a fine layer of dust, hands gripping her backpack straps, eyes tracking the rotor blades as they lowered. Each time the blades swept toward the ground, The wind hit her face like a hot blade. The helicopter descended, its tail starting to drift off axis. Someone shouted into the radio. Crosswind. Hold the main axis. But in a single moment, what no one wanted happened. A dry, piercing crash tore through the air, sharp as thunder right beside your ear. The left main rotor clipped the ground. The fuselage lurched upward, then slammed down. The entire cabin tilted hard to the right, the nose smashing into the sand. Metal screeched, a long, chilling wail. A sound unlike any drill, unlike any simulation. Real. Too real. Dust and sand billowed, thick with the acrid smell of engine oil and electrical smoke. Voices shouted over each other. Fall back, everyone back, fuel leak, call for medics. Now someone's trapped. There's someone inside. A group of soldiers scrambled around, some grabbing fire extinguishers. Others pulling on gloves, but no one dared get too close. No flames yet, but the air was heavy with the smell of burning gas. And no one could be sure would the fuel tank explode in 30 seconds. Dana stood frozen for 2 seconds. Then she saw. Through the smoke, past the cracked cockpit glass, she spotted a bloodied face. It was the pilot, Lieutenant Halverson. He was pinned in the pilot's seat, head slumped to the side, forehead smashed against the control panel. Blood ran from his temple, staining his collar. His eyes were half open, unresponsive. The harness still held him tight, locking him into the tilted cockpit. She saw no one else in the cabin. No calls for help crackled through the backup radio. People kept shouting. One sergeant was on the radio trying to reach command. Others pulled back, setting up a safety perimeter. Chaos swirled, but no one approached the tilted helicopter, as if an invisible wall stood between them and the machine. Dana tightened her grip on her backpack straps and took a step forward. No one noticed. A second step. The wind whipped her hair back, sand stinging her face. Her eyes didn't blink. A third step. She started running. No one called her name. No orders were given. No one held her back. She ran straight into the smoke toward the Black Hawk, lying tilted like a dying mechanical beast. The rotor blades still spun faintly, whining with each slowing turn. Shards of broken glass jutted from the sand, crunching under her boots. A plume of smoke burst from the secondary compartment, raw gasoline mixed with hot metal. The air was thick, hard to breathe. Dana reached the side door. The main hatch was pinned to the ground, jammed by sand. She turned, grabbing the emergency release handle. It wouldn't budge. She didn't panic. She twisted her wrist, feeling for the secondary release. Her fingers found the metal hook. Pull, twist, nothing moved. Her eyes scanned the door. She counted down in her head. 1, 2, 3. She slammed her boot heel into the edge of the glass, creating a fracture point, stepped back half a pace, then struck again right at the junction of the aluminum frame and bulletproof glass. A sharp click sounded. The hinge gave way just enough. Without hesitation, Dana gripped the door with both hands, yanked it open, and slipped into the tilted cockpit. It was hot. Black smoke flooded her lungs, making her cough violently. Inside, Halverson was still unconscious. The harness dug into his chest. She reached for the release clasp, angled awkwardly, the straps taut. It wouldn't budge the usual way. Dana twisted her wrist, using the exact motion she'd practiced night after night, pressing the off-axis clasp from behind the shoulder at a 27-degree angle. The harness snapped free. She braced his shoulders, pulling him clear of the control frame, careful to avoid the sparking electrical panel. As she dragged him through the broken hatch, a flash of fire erupted behind her, a red glow sparking in the left electronics bay. Dana didn't look back. She pulled him across the sand, step by step, through the smoke, through the shouts, through the makeshift barrier. Only when she reached the safety line, more than 10 meters from the wreckage, did she stop. Her body was still shaking, her hands were still slick with blood, but her eyes still fixed forward, unblinking. No one called her name. No one gave an order. But Dana Mitchell ran, while most stood frozen, while radios crackled with wind and shouts, while eyes waited for someone else to decide. She ducked low and charged toward the Black Hawk, tilted in a haze of smoke and raw gasoline. The wind lashed her face. Sand stung her cheeks. Tiny shards of glass from the secondary cockpit swirled up, slicing the thin skin on the back of her hand like cold paper cuts. But Dana didn't falter. She saw it clearly. The side hatch was jammed. The left rotor blade was buried deep in the ground, and the control cabin was sparking from the electrical panel. Time was running out. A single electrical spark needed just 10 seconds to ignite the fuel line, and Halverson was still trapped inside. Dana didn't pause to think. She rushed forward, crouching close to the aircraft's body, hot wind blasting back from the scalding metal hull. Her hand reached for the emergency release handle, the primary one, designed for warped doors in a crash. She pulled. It didn't budge. Jammed. She gritted her teeth, not out of fear, but because this was the exact scenario she'd trained for until her hands were calloused. Her left boot heel slammed into the edge of the glass, right at the junction of the doorframe and hinge from the old schematic she'd memorized. A dry click sounded just enough. Her right hand slipped into the cracked gap, hooking the hidden latch. Once. Twice. Then, the lock gave way. The door swung open. A choking stench of burnt wiring poured out with the smoke. The heat hit her throat like a slap. Dana closed her eyes for half a second, then crawled inside. The interior was dark. Smoke seeped into every breath. Halverson was unconscious, body slumped at an angle, head drooping to one side, harness tight across his shoulders and chest. Dana slid her hand under, flipping the strap the way she'd practiced, not a straight pull, but a twist, a push, then a reverse turn. Her fingers slipped on blood and oil. But finally the clasp released. She crouched low, one hand shoving aside dangling cables, the other slipping under his back, lifting slowly. Halverson's body was heavy, but Dana didn't yank. She moved inch by inch, backing up, her feet feeling their way across the tilted floor littered with glass and circuit casings. One careless step back, and her shoulder slammed into the secondary control panel. She clenched her teeth against the pain, kept going. Finally, both of them made it out of the cockpit. The air outside felt lighter, but only for a second, because right behind her, a low boom echoed. Flames erupted from the tail. A red-hot blaze swept through the dusk. The landing zone burned. Dana braced herself, dragging Halverson across the sand a few more meters. Each step felt like carrying the weight of an entire life. When she was about 10 meters from the helicopter, she lowered him down, quickly checking his breathing. Still there, faint, but there. Only then did Dana collapse to her knees. Her left arm was bleeding. Her jacket was torn. Her back ached. Her eyes stung from the smoke, but she didn't cry, didn't speak. She just raised her head, looking at the helicopter smoldering behind her, and knew she'd made it in time. Not for glory. Not to prove anything. Only because that was the moment everything she'd prepared for finally had a reason to exist. The wail of ambulance sirens echoed across the landing zone, cutting through the smoky air. A late gust stretched the lingering heat from the dying flames on the Black Hawk's hull. Firefighters rushed in, surrounding the scene. A team of medics sprinted toward Halverson, swiftly placing him on a stretcher, attaching a breathing mask, and starting an IV. And right beside them, Dana Mitchell still sat. She didn't stand, didn't step forward. She just sat on the sand. One hand was limp, and the other was lightly propped behind her. Her uniform was singed at the shoulder. Her left arm streaked with blood, a shard of glass still embedded shallowly in her wrist. Her knees were caked with sand, and her hair tangled in the wind. Sweat and soot coated her face, dulling her eyes not with exhaustion, but with a quiet stillness. The SAR team leader, Captain Kramer, ran over. For the first time in months, he didn't look at her with indifference, not with the guarded glance of briefings or the coldness of group critiques. He stopped and knelt down, one hand resting on her shoulder. The other gently gripped her arm, not too tight, but enough to convey what he'd never said. "Good work, Mitchell." His voice was low, rough, and real. "I was wrong." Dana didn't reply. She just stared ahead, where the helicopter still smoldered. The flames were fading. No more danger. No one is left trapped. A young soldier, a teammate who'd once laughed when she practiced rope climbing at night, approached. He hesitated, unsure of what to do. Finally, he crouched, placed a hand on her shoulder, gave a light squeeze, and stepped back. "Not a doll," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "Not a doll." Dana stayed silent. She only nodded faintly. An ambulance rolled up. A nurse stepped forward, reaching to help her stand. Dana waved her off, refusing. She stayed seated, closing her eyes for a few seconds, leaning her head lightly against the sand behind her, as if her body needed one final moment to breathe. After everything, the sand was hot, but peaceful. She took a deep breath. The wind carried the smell of burnt metal, mixed with desert dust and something unique to this place, dry, rough, and real. When she opened her eyes, the red glow of dusk was fading on the western horizon. The Black Hawk was now just a hazy silhouette, a charred black streak half burned in the scarred, sandy field. She looked at it for a long time, then whispered so softly, as if only to herself, "Right time, right place." That's all. Not for others to hear. Not for a report. Just because that was what she believed. She didn't need apologies, didn't need medals, didn't need anyone to call her something different tomorrow morning. Because what needed saying, she'd said with her actions, and what needed proving was in the dried blood, the steady breaths, and the look in her eyes that no one would ever dare dismiss again. Courage doesn't depend on size or assumption, but on whether you step forward when everyone else steps back. The story of Dana Mitchell, the rescued airman, underestimated, yet quietly preparing. Quietly stepping forward when all others held back, is proof that dignity needs no fanfare and bravery needs no applause. If this story moved you, share it with someone you know who's quietly pushing forward like Dana. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more true, deep, and powerful stories. And if you have something to say, leave a comment below. I read everyone, and I value every response. See you in the next story.